Okay, good afternoon. We're going to call to order the Los Osos Groundwater Basin Management Committee meeting. We'll start with a roll call.
Director Gibson.
Here.
Director Reinecke.
Here.
Chair Zimmer.
Here.
Please note Director Cesena is currently absent.
All right, item 3, Pledge Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, item 4, board member comments. Do we have any comments from the board? Nope. No, Beth? Okay. Okay, we have no board member comments. We'll open that to public comment still. See no public comment.
If you have a public comment and you're in the boardroom, please come up to the podium. If you're online, please raise your hand.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah,
Can you
I
have
just-
public comment on board member comments if there were no board member comments? I mean, I guess you could comment on the fact that there were no comments.
Yeah. All right, no board member comments and no public comment. We'll go to item 5. We have a special presentation from the county planning to follow up on the Los Osos groundwater rate implementation approach.
Yeah, so Chair Jimmer, I'll take a second to introduce Claire Momberger with County Planning. If you recall at our last meeting, Claire provided a presentation on the growth management ordinance framework. We had a discussion at the board level. There were some sort of specific questions about, the mechanisms for how the allocation of units would work. And so we requested that county planning come back to this BMC meeting to provide an updated presentation, provide some additional detail on the mechanisms for the growth management ordinance framework, be available to answer questions. And then I think Claire will highlight it, but there'll be several additional presentations on the growth management ordinance
Thank you, Dan. Yes, I'm Claire Momberger. I'm a county planner from the county with the long range planning team. Back again today to speak to the Los Osos growth rate implementation approach as it relates to the Los Osos community plan update and the October 29th County Board of Supervisors hearing. As Dan mentioned, we were here last month at last month's meeting. And the slides we went through last month are in this presentation. So I won't read every single word on the slides. But last month we walked through just high level overarching policies and how they would change with the Coastal Commission's direction on June 13th to the county. Today we'll get to dig deeper into the details about how the Los Osos waitlist fits into the growth rate implementation approach. And like Dan said, I'll also be going through these details at the Los Osos Community Advisory Council meeting tomorrow evening. And then the county is facilitating a Los Osos town hall on October 5th. Here's just, this was up last month, just flashing through the updated milestones. The one that is most pertinent to today's discussion was the Coastal Commission suggested modifications provided to the county on June 13th as it pertains to the local coastal plan amendment. These were the key policies and regulations. What I've is in bold type here is the key policy that relates to today's growth rate implementation discussion, which is the 1% residential growth rate cap for the community that is to include accessory and affordable dwelling units. Like I said, last month we walked through the high level overarching policies and how they would change with this direction. Today, we're digging a bit deeper into the details about how the Los Osos waitlist to build fits into the process. The growth management ordinance, this slide was up last month too. Details are here, but the growth management ordinance, Title 26 of the county code, was established in 1990 and is the provision for the Los Osos waitlist to build and also the 0% growth rate for parcels in the Los Osos prohibition zone. And these are the amendments that staff is recommending to the board on October 29th. We discussed in detail these amendments at last month's meeting, but just to summarize, there are amendments being recommended for the general procedure change, mainly changing the review of the growth rate and allocation from a fiscal year, moving that to a calendar year basis. And then also adding this specific language that annual review is based on the best available information and data. And then the recommended amendments to the Los Osos section are summarized here too, that the maximum growth rate cannot exceed 1%, which is in line with the Coastal Commission's direction, and also is dependent upon the best available groundwater basin data, that a metered approach is established to allowable development, and that staff coordinates with the Los Osos Basin Management Committee. If the Board of Supervisors affirms the recommendations on October 29th, coordination with the BMC would look like maintaining regular coordination with BMC staff over the yearly allocation and growth rate. So these are the high-level amendments because last time we couldn't share the details yet about the exact growth rate process, but now we're able to update everyone on the recommended mechanics for the application of the growth rate. And before we jump into the details, I do want to just explain the rationale behind what staff is recommending to the board when it comes to the mechanics of the growth rate implementation. Some people have been on the Los Osos waitlist to build for decades. It was established in 1989, and they may not be ready right away to submit construction permit applications. And so staff has been balancing with our recommendation, has been balancing honoring those people's place in line in the community who are on the wait list with the people in the community who are not on the wait list but are ready to build their home. And so we're balancing wanting to give waitlist owners priority and their fair shot at building their homes, but also giving that opportunity to people who are not on the wait list but might be ready to submit a permit application and build their homes. So with those things in mind, staff created this phased procedure with some detailed noticing structure to balance those two situations for people in the community. And so that kind of looks like 3 phases where the first phase is allocating the total number of allowed homes by breaking up the wait list into batches, which would all happen before July 1st. The second phase would happen between July 1st and September 30th, where the total number of allowed homes is allocated to the entire waitlist, opening opportunities for the entire waitlist while still using the order of the waitlist to establish priority. The third phase would happen between October 1st and December 31st and allocates the total number of allowed homes for the year to the community sewer service area as a whole, regardless as the waitlist. So that's just to give an idea of the general framework, and then now we'll dig into the details. So this table that I'll be showing on the next couple of slides is actual screenshots of staff's recommended amendments. So you're really seeing what staff is going to be proposing to the board on October 29th. So we're going to walk through now the allocation process and the noticing structure. So from left to right, the columns are the annual time frame. the allocation process in the middle, and all the way to the right, action required of property owners. So let's get started. So after the Board of Supervisors approves the maximum annual allocation for the upcoming calendar year and prior to January 1st, the department will distribute written notice to waitlist property owners of their position on the waitlist and also which batch number in the upcoming calendar year their property belongs to. That notice will also include all applicable deadlines. And at that point in time, no actions required of waitlist property owners. And then this embarks kind of on that first phase I spoke to, where the first batch of waitlist property owners, batch number 1, would have 30 days or from January 1st to February 1st to provide written confirmation to the department that they are either ready to submit a construction permit application or they're not ready to submit. And those property owners, those people who are ready to submit a construction permit application, ready to build their home, must do so within 45 days of February 1st or as indicated on the notice. And this is for that second batch, batch number 2 of 3 of waitlist property owners. They would have from March 1st to April 1st to tell the county through written confirmation that they are either ready to submit a construction permit application or not ready to submit. And at that time, the county would look at, okay, what from batch 1, what leftover allocations are available for this next batch of people from the wait list? What's available to be allocated for people to apply for construction permits? And then those people who confirm that they're ready would have 45 days to submit. And then this is for batch number 3 of 3, same general idea, but pushed back from May 1 to June 1 is when they would have to contact the county and then submit a construction permit within 45 days of June 1. And this is entering into that second phase I talked about where the batches, the total allocations are opened up to the entire wait list. And so we're kind of calling it an open period for any waitlist property owner can notify the department of their readiness to submit a construction permit. The department would evaluate, okay, how many, after those first 3 batches, how many allocations weren't claimed. People from those first 3 batches weren't ready to apply for a construction permit. And then those requests would be evaluated or served on through using the priority of the wait list. For example, if number 61 and number 50 on the same day come to the county and say, I'm really ready to submit a construction permit, if we have one more allocation available, number 50 would be served before number 61. And this is kind of phase 2B, but this time frame from August 16th to September 30th is to allow the people who notified the county from July 1 to August 1. This is time for the county to process those requests, and then those people have until September 30th to submit a construction permit application. And then finally, we make it to phase 3, the final phase, from October 1st to December 31st, where once again, the county would take a look at, okay, after phase 1 with those first 3 batches, and after phase 2, when anyone on the wait list could potentially apply for a construction permit, what's left over? What unused allocations are out there? If the county has unused allocations out there, then anyone in the community sewer service area could request allocation, and that would be served on a first come, first served basis, regardless of waitlist position. And then those people would have until December 31st to submit their construction permit. And so to reiterate, staff's recommendation for this noticing structure that we just walked through in that phased batched procedure is based on our effort to strike a balance between people who've been on the wait list for decades and may or may not be ready to build a home, and those people who are not on the wait list but may be ready to build a home right away. The structured noticing gives people time to consider their readiness to submit, and also gives people in the sewer service area multiple opportunities within the year to use available allocations and submit a construction permit application. And then I just wanted to, of course, include some key public meetings coming up. Tomorrow evening, virtually, the Los Osos Community Advisory Council meeting is occurring, and I will be giving a similar presentation there to explain these amendments. On October 5th, the county's hosting a Los Osos Town Hall discussion, and that's at Los Osos Middle School from 1:30 to 4 p.m. on October 5th. On October 8th is when the amendments that I spoke to today are going to be introduced at a County Board of Supervisors hearing. But the actual hearing where the board will evaluate and make final action on the Los Osos Community Plan update, growth rate implementation approach, and the Los Osos Habitat Conservation Plan will be on October 29th in downtown San Luis Obispo at the new government center. And then in December 2024, end of this year, the Coastal Commission it's tentative, but the Coastal Commission may consider the Board of Supervisors October 29th action. And with that, staff is available for questions.
Thank you, Claire. Any questions? Go ahead, Beth.
Okay, thank you again, Claire, for that presentation. So I do have a couple clarifying questions before we go into public comments. So I heard you mention the sewer service area when it comes to, getting into that last batch of, well, I guess it wouldn't be a batch, going out to. Can you explain a little bit more? So that period of time between August and December, when you're saying within the sewer service area, so how are these related?
That's we're getting feedback. Okay. Thank you, Ron, tech extraordinaire. Thanks, Beth, for that question. I could have started with that context. So the Los Osos waitlist to build is for vacant properties within the prohibition zone, which essentially lines up with the sewer service area. So boundary is the same throughout the entire phasing for the batches and after the batches. The only thing is with that third phase, anyone within the community sewer service area who's even not on a wait list could request to have an allocation to submit a construction permit.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So then my next follow-on question to that is, where does the outside the sewer service area properties, where do they come into play in this process?
Thank you. Yes, I think in last month's discussion, we spoke more on outside the sewer service area because that's when it was most relevant. This noticing structure and phasing structure is relevant to the sewer service area where there's a wait list. So when the board decides on the maximum number of allowed units for the year according to the growth rate that's in place, 75% of that total number will go to the sewer service area. 25% will go towards outside the sewer service area. And right now in the ordinance, it's written that that division would be in place until July 1st. So after July 1st, the allocation opportunities are only going towards the sewer service area.
Okay, great. And then, so I guess my last question, just for clarification. So it sounds like we get toward the end of the year and we have, some properties that weren't able to begin the permitting process. So they get kind of pushed down the list, but it opens up to a whole new group of people. So my question is, if we're opening it up at that point to people that aren't on the wait list, what kind of outreach is being done now for the people that are on the wait list? Are we going all the way down the list to be sure that anyone who has been waiting is well aware that we are beginning this process now, so they're not taken by surprise if this is offered to them?
Mhm. Thank you. Yeah, so every property owner that's on the wait list has been contacted this year about what's coming down the pike over the next couple months. We will be noticing the first 3 batches, as I spoke to earlier, but like you're saying, that only gets to a certain number on the list. During this open period in July is when the word would be spread that, you know, there's an open period for waitlist property owners who maybe are further down the list and would have the opportunity to apply if there are allocations available. So during that period, July to August.
Okay, thank you. And just to clarify, the last part that has to be completed within that 45-day window is the permit application, is the plans with all of the drawings, is their habitat conservation plan, is the Title 19 water offset credits, and a will serve from their purveyor.
Yeah, if I can clarify, I'll speak to that for sure. So this language is within the amendments that staff is recommending at the last chunk subsection D there, that says to submit a construction application. 1, there has to be allocations available. The county has confirmed that. 2, the property owner has a will serve letter from the water provider. Things might be different if they're on a well, but we'll just, to the purpose of this discussion, they have a will serve letter from a water provider. Third is that they have a will serve letter for wastewater treatment from the sewer. And 4th is that they have, they're complying with the habitat conservation plan, which could be a certificate of inclusion or something equivalent to that. So those 4 things are required to submit a construction permit application. The Title 19 retrofit to build requirement just needs to be met before building permit issuance. So really high level building permit life is application, review, issuance, inspection, final. So before issuance, the property owner would need to satisfy the Title 19 requirements.
Got it. Thank you so much. And lastly, so when you say they have to show proof that they're going to be served by the sewer, how does that apply to a property that would be using a septic system?
There's language in there in the amendments right now, but they'd have to comply with our Title 19 building and construction ordinance, which has really specific language on what wastewater treatment on-site septic has to look like. So they'd have to comply with that language, including the local agency management plan, the LAMP.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Beth. Anybody else? Chuck? Supervisor Gibson?
I've sort of been living this for the last couple of weeks with much gratitude to both Claire and Corey Hahn, who's here. You know, at your first exposure to it, it sounds a little complicated, but as Claire led, it has an internal consistency, and it really is a very careful balancing of opportunities for, you know, trying to be as fair as we possibly can. You know, I think you know, we talked a lot about the details. There's at this point essentially no exemptions to it. You know, and ADUs are not exempt. The Anastasi subdivision is not exempt. They have to get in line like everybody else. So I think this is a very solid approach to start. And then we're gonna, you know, in consultation with the BMC, we're gonna make sure that it evolves to the situation appropriately. And I think we'll get into a rhythm. The other thing I want to emphasize is that, as we spoke about last time, absolutely committed to keeping the BMC informed as to the progress of issuing and filing building permits. And I sort of envision, I was mentioning to Corey today, we could even have a real-time update on the web. This is how many allocations issued for these years. These are how many have been taken up. These are how many permits are applied for, issued, finalized, and, you know, we can develop out of that, I think, a pretty good predictive tool as to the actual connection rate going forward. I think we, you know, it's a matter of gaining a little experience, but wanted to emphasize to my colleagues on the BMC, county commitment to being as you know, as free. We may give you more data than you ever wanted to know, but that's tell us when to stop. So.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any questions, so we'll go ahead and open it to public.
Mark,
yeah.
just, I had maybe more of a comment than a question. Just one of the things that I think is important to emphasize from a water resource management perspective, you know, and that's why we're here. And I think Director Reineke and Claire mentioned it, but yeah, the Title 19 ordinance requires that these new developments obtain 2-to-1 water offset credits before trying to get the terminology right, issuance of a building permit. So I think just as an important component of this program from the Basin Management Committee's perspective, and one that's worth highlighting. And then also, I think the specific language for the growth management framework that's being proposed is available on County Planning's website. You may have already mentioned it. I may have missed that, but I just wanted to point people to that. You can see the very specific red line language on the County Planning website.
Thanks, Dan. Why don't we go ahead and open it to public comment?
If you are online and you would like to make a public comment, please raise your hand. And if you're in the boardroom, please come up to the podium. We'll take public comment in the boardroom first.
Hello, I'm David Cheney. I'm just trying to get kind of up to speed on these issues. One question I had is there any distinction for the scale of the projects? Is an ADU treated the same way as a large home? And you know, if someone made commitments to, you know, great water conservation, would that provide any benefits in the process?
I think we typically take all the questions, we'll respond.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, yeah.
great. And then I had another question, which is the permits are dependent on best available groundwater basin data. So if you had adverse data, how would that work out in the process? How would you slow down or stop things?
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Lindy. I think you forgot to bring back what the growth management versus the water is set up, because it's not going to be a full 60 homes in the first year, so, right? There's so many houses. I don't think anybody knows this process, and that's what really is going to be lacking for Los Osos when they come to this town hall meeting, which I hope you have filmed and have all clarified this discussion and every other discussion that we need to know. We've waited 30 years. I wonder how well the waiting list for 2 decades, how well were they informed? A lot of these people have moved, passed on, who knows? So if it was just a little postcard, I don't think that would be adequate to give people an idea of how valuable their property has just become. There's also how many people aren't ready to go to the top. So we have local builders here that have known for years. They watch moment to moment. And so they're ready to bring forward projects that they've presented and worked with. I know of a couple of them already ready to go. So they'll just jump to the top. They won't have had to compete very much. I wanted to know how much you expect. What is an average? Say somebody sees the list, they decide that they want to go ahead and build something. So they begin, what are we talking about in permits before they actually are in a position to be able to go the next step? how many planners do we have set up to start making these, to expedite some of these plans? What about guest houses? They're not on the list. They don't have to, they can use all the water they want, right? They don't have to meet any of those things. Where is the HCP approval? I understand we haven't bought the property yet, so I'm a little concerned that you try to build a house, but you can't get that approval. And what about affordable housing projects? Are they just, since they're unaffordable, they will never get built? Is that the plan? Or do you have any kind of way of moving those to the top a little bit? So I think those were my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Becky McFarland, Los Osos. Thank you, Claire, for another good presentation. Once again, I'm here to speak about guest houses, and I will keep talking about guest houses until some sense is made of what things are saying. So the LCP update says something like, they're better considered as adding a bedroom to a home. And for those that don't know, these are mostly not attached to a home. They can be 2 stories high on top of a giant garage. They include a bathroom and a wet bar. And if your household is anything like mine, you know, they're considering, you know, you're not going to use a wet bar as a kitchen, so people aren't going to live in it full time. At our house, you know, we have a microwave. You can have a microwave, convection oven, you know, countertop, cooktop, air top, Instapot, all of those things, and cook a meal for a family. We know people are living in these full time. We don't want to turn them in. Shouldn't be up to us to do code enforcement. A big concern with these is they don't have to have a coastal development permit. The first one I learned of over in Baywood had that. After the ADU ban went in, suddenly no coastal development permit. They can have a ministerial permit. They don't have to notice neighbors, and they don't have to retrofit. So now we have no cap on basically 2-bedroom starter homes or places that, you know, 4 people could live in. They're not being retrofitted. They're huge. Drive around town. I'll take you on a tour. These have been being built before any of this happened. I can think of 8 of them right now, and half of them are being lived in. I've said before, one man told me, oh, the head of planning told me it's the same as a granny unit, so I built one at my other house for my mom, which is wonderful. I'd like to do that for my disabled son. I can't do it, and I wouldn't do it because this doesn't make any sense. They also should be included in the 1% growth. I mean, anybody can see that, you know, it's like, I thought, what could I bring in as example? It's like, okay, I'm going to take a spoonful out of your dish of ice cream. And you're like, yeah, that's fine. But I show up with this. That's what happened on our street. A bedroom above a garage is this. And so there's water being used, and it's being used for, I'm not sure what, but a lot of cars we've never seen before are showing up. This needs to be taken care of. I don't think it's that hard. Wouldn't you like to make sense and have your community go, yeah, they did something really right? Count those in the 1%, make them retrofit, and put a cap on the number of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky.
Good afternoon, Claire. Thank you also. That was a good presentation. Nowhere though in any of this does it speak to the
Can you
requirements.
state your name, please?
Patrick
Thanks. Patrick,
McGibney.
thank you.
Nowhere in this does it speak to the requirement for a sustainable basin or what that means. The basin plan calls for sustainability for the current population. And sustainability doesn't imply for next month or next year. Sustainability implies long-term for the foreseeable future. I'd like to read a section out of this area that we're speaking of, and I'd like to get your comment on it. And if you can't, Claire, I'd like Mr. Gibson to respond. It says this section implies within the Los Osos urban reserve line shall apply to all residential dwelling units, including accessory dwelling units and deed restricted affordable housing dwelling units. What about, as we've been talking about, guest houses and additional bedrooms, hotel expansions? Are these included in the all dwelling units? And if not, why? It goes on and it says the annual maximum allocation for dwelling units within the Los Osos urban reserve line shall be conducted as follows. The annual growth rate shall be established based on review of the best available groundwater monitoring data. The department shall conduct such a review and provide the recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. Such review shall include consideration of recommendations from the Los Osos Basin Management Committee, you folks, and the Groundwater Sustainability Director's review of such recommendations. So what it sounds like to me is that Blaine Reilly, the director, will review these recommendations presented by the board, you guys, and they will decide if those recommendations are warranted and valid. Doesn't that usurp the authority of the Basin Management Committee? Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. We have no more comments in the board.
All right, we'll take public comment online. Jeff Edwards, all you have to do is unmute yourself.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Jeff Edwards, and I'd like to raise an issue that maybe hasn't been fully considered to date, and that is something that has been discussed for quite a long time in Los Osos, and that's the availability or implementation of residential uses in the central business district. And we all know that communities that do add residential to the downtown areas, it adds vibrancy, stimulates redevelopment. And in our case, in Los Osos, we can literally re-envision our downtown. The problem is that without an exemption under Title 26, this residential development is not likely to occur in our downtown. Again, not failing to fulfill some longstanding goals and wishes. Coincidentally, the Coastal Commission did not speak to residential development in our urban core, our downtown central business district, which this kind of diverse residential use in our downtown would not only add the vibrancy I mentioned, but it could include live-work arrangements and senior housing, which we have none of that right now in Los Osos. So it would be a shame not to have senior housing available. In earlier iterations of our area plan, there was a cap put on the number of residential units in the downtown. So again, I would ask for the committee's support for an exemption to include residential development in the central business district, and that would be outside of Title 26 and outside of the 1% growth cap. The status quo, in my view, downtown is not an option. What we have downtown is really a sea of parking lots and dilapidated buildings, not very attractive. And so this I believe would clearly create the impetus with an exemption to develop our downtown and something we could be proud of. Thank you.
All right, we have one more public comment online. Catherine, all you have to do is unmute yourself.
Thank you. Catherine Corson. My question is regarding affordable housing. Supervisor Gibson last meeting reminded us we have a strategy to develop affordable housing. In each of the batches, Claire, that you outline, is there any consideration for ensuring that we have a certain amount of affordable housing approved in order to achieve our overall strategy? Thank you.
There's no further public online or in the boardroom.
Okay, thank you. I'll bring it back to the board for discussion.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, in responding to the questions, let me jump in first and then we can have Claire run through. I saw her taking all those. And I want to be very clear about what we are not considering as we come to October 29th and the question of, in the first instance, guest houses. Guest houses, according to our local coastal program or LCP, are not considered dwelling units. There is no indication, there's no move to consider them dwelling units. This discussion has gone on for a long time, and certainly public commenters are welcome to continue to bring it up. But guest houses in the permitting structure are considered extra bedrooms. And if members of the community have concerns about how they're being used, we do have a code enforcement process to go through. That code enforcement process is complaint driven. And so the only way to initiate that is for someone to identify a subject property to be identified there. So the Coastal Commission looked at our LCP top to bottom. They did not suggest any modifications to guest houses. I won't be bringing any proposal to modify how we approach guest houses. And so I just want to be as clear as I possibly can be that that is not going to change. And again, if community members have concerns, they're welcome to contact my office, and I can get them in touch with the code enforcement process if they'd like to do that. And then second, let me respond to the question of an exemption for mixed use. That would be a nice thing, I think, eventually, but that is not in the proposal that's coming forward to the modifications to Title 26, the Growth Management Ordinance. In fact, there are very few exemptions, essentially no exemptions. And the reason for that is we want to respond to the concerns that were raised by our water purveyor friends about being very careful as to how we manage this. And the Coastal Commission is very clear about what they expect in terms of a growth cap. And mixed use, while I think it's an admirable goal and can be useful in some places, is another water using addition as a dwelling unit. And similarly, accessory dwelling units, which in fact are not allowed in Los Osos currently by the LCP, are sort of by double definition not going to be addressed here. Nor is affordable housing. Now, let me say, having said that, let me indicate, following on the comments I made a little bit earlier, I would like to see these things worked into the plan. It is really important that we have affordable housing developed everywhere in our county, including Los Osos. So my approach to this is I want to see these growth management tools put in place. I want to see us start the long delayed process of new residential development in Los Osos. And then I would hope we could have the discussion here and at our Board of Supervisors as to how we can, as a group managing the water resource of Los Osos, focus that resource on achieving policy goals that the Board of Supervisors has long laid out. But first and foremost, I think we need to get experience in managing added demand that's going to be coming online. Affordable housing would be my first priority. ADUs and mixed use with commercial is related to that, and there may be other instances. And then finally, let me just comment in terms of the information that's going to be used to determine the allocations, and Claire can speak, I think, a little more detail on this. That is the information that this committee develops, specifically our annual report, which has a detailed examination of the water resource in the Los Osos groundwater basin. And so I would imagine that we will get into the appropriate cycle of using the information that this body reports to the court as the basis for doing that. And that's detailed out. We talked about a little bit about that last time. So those as overarching ideas as framework. I'm certainly happy to discuss that with colleagues on the dais here, but then if Claire would like to respond to any of the other specific questions that you got. Chairman, is that right?
Yep. Yeah, sorry.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Claire.
Thank you. I jotted down a couple questions, just for clarity. There was a question about the scale of a project, and how it needs to meet the Title 19 retrofit to build water savings requirements. So we actually conducted a study that concluded last summer of our entire Los Osos water offset program, which updated the total water demand estimate of single family homes, multifamily homes, and mobile homes. And that was based on historical water usage data kindly provided by the purveyors to the county. As Supervisor Gibson mentioned, ADUs are not currently allowed in Los Osos. And so the program would need to be updated if ADUs did become allowed in Los Osos to include a study of estimated water use for a dwelling that size. And then there was also a question about if there is groundwater monitoring data that doesn't support growth in the community, what would happen? Two things on that. In calendar year 2028, and these details were covered at last month's meeting, but we'll cover them again at the town hall for sure. But in calendar year 2028, a 5-year average look back of the basin yield metric, which comes from the BMC's annual reports, would be used to determine what the most appropriate growth rate would be. And there's a table with those details in the proposed ordinance. And then the other thing with that is the total allocation and the growth rate is reviewed by the board on an annual basis. And so there's an annual check of where things are at, what was allocated last year, what houses were actually built, what could growth look like next year based on the best available data. I guess just to reiterate, the total number of homes that could be allowed in calendar year 2025, based on the current proposed ordinance, the current recommended ordinance would be a 0.4% growth rate, which works out to about 25 dwelling units for the entire community for the first year. And that 0.4% is based on the 0.4% of the existing number of dwelling units. So in Los Osos, there's about 6,300 existing dwelling units. And so 0.4% of that works out to about 25. That's all I had time to jot down.
Sure, please, Corey.
Hi, Corey Hahn, County Planning Building. So I also heard a few other questions I just want to address. One being affordable housing. There is a portion that the outside of sewer service area, the 25%, that includes setting aside for affordable housing. So 25% of it is set aside for affordable housing in the first half of the year. If none of the allocations for that set aside is used, then it will go towards the sewer service area in the latter half of the year. That's one of the ones I heard. I also heard a question about BMC's input, how we would convey that to the board. So the idea is that, like almost any information that the county gets, we always have some level of staff analysis and consideration that before we bring it to the board, because we hear whether it's a consultant that we hire, whether it's public comments, whether it's comments from an agency, we always look at that, provide some sort of analysis, and we present both of that to the board. So the board will see both the agencies or consultants or anybody, public comment, whatever it is, in addition to staff's analysis, so that they get some sort of insight as to kind of help. Sometimes we get information that's so technical or so voluminous, like there's so much information. We help distill that information so it's bite-sized, understandable to someone that may not be as technically sound. We also heard a question about noticing. So the wait list, if the board on October 29th were to take action in the affirmative based on staff's recommendation, we would then begin noticing the entire wait list. So the wait list is informed that the board took this action, that if the Coastal Commission accepts, recognizes the board's action, these are the things that will play out. This is the procedure that will be, and they'll have a chance to see that before the following year. And we understand the short turnaround, but that's the parameters we have, right? Coastal Commission took action in June. We have 6 months. They give us 6 months to act on this. We've been doing a lot of prep work to lead to the October 29th meeting. If the board takes action on it, then we can say, hey, we got the green light. We can start noticing everybody, and they can start asking questions. They can start asking procedures, and like Supervisor Gibson said, it's a work in progress. Like, this is our first stab at it. We're trying to balance a lot of the different factors. Is it perfect? Probably not. And we understand that. And that's why we have these meetings with the BMC. We have these meetings with BMC staff, with 8 other agencies to get it right. As we learn more and as we get better information over time, we can bring it back to the board, amend it to learn from our past operations, whatever it is, and it will be better and better as time goes on. And those are kind of the ones I've heard. If there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
I think there was one question about the outreach effort and how many vacant parcels. I think I asked that in a question, and you had a number, and it was pretty significant. Didn't you have like a large number of your outreach effort that was directly for each parcel or something of that nature, right?
Yeah, so we contacted in August after we processed the Coastal Commission's direction and figured out what the next few months would look like, the 6-month time frame that Corey spoke to. We reached out to every waitlist property owner by mail with an update on what's coming up. And then I also asked them to respond to me with their best contact information so we can be sure to have good contact information for everyone on the wait list. And so I've gotten almost 200 responses out of the maybe 2. I can't remember the exact number, but a good size of response to that notification.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Corey. We'll bring it back to the board.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. That's a question I was wondering as well, Claire. So, okay, big picture wise, I do have some comments here, and I think it came up. Best available data. Yes, we are going to be in communication. I think this is important. We, as BMC members, are going to be discussing the status of the basin on an annual basis, and best available data is, I presume this means the same information going into our annual reports. Maybe that could be verbatim to.
It is.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt that, but in the text of the growth management ordinance speaks to the basin yield metric as determined for previous years.
Okay, so when it says best available data, it's just referring back to, okay. Could we say best available data from the annual report? Just to make sure that there's not any confusion about, because there are other sources of data, people can come up with other numbers, but right now, the BMC here is tasked with being the regulatory agency over the basin, to make sure that we are managing it.
Yeah, at least the reporting agency over the basin, right?
The reporting, yes, but we're the ones that are supposed to be monitoring it,
Exactly.
so.
And I don't know if you want to get all your questions out, but I think Corey's ready. to
Sure,
respond.
no, I'll take an answer now.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why we want to keep it best available information and data is because if we get information that's better than what at the time the annual report has, we can consider that. So let's say there's a study that shows that maybe there isn't a reason for us to recommend a growth rate for the following year, right? And we want to be able to consider that. So And that's part of the reason why it's always kind of like checks and balances thing, right? So we want to be able to look at the best information we can find, whether that's from a study from a geohydrologist or whatever it is, but also come back to the BMC and get your formal official input, whatever it is. And we bring that back to the board. So we didn't want to tie it down to just the annual report in case there was better information out there and that we can consider. And we're happy to, bring that, whatever that information is, we can bring it back to the BMC as well if we're looking at additional things that maybe that can even help inform your annual report even further, right? So and Supervisor Gibson mentioned the basin yield metric. Like that's what it comes down to. Like that's where the GMO, the growth management ordinance, the red lines show that we're looking at that as kind of the bottom line. So if there is information that's out there that's better, we can definitely bring it back to the BMC. You can consider it as part of your process, and then the basin yield metric, if it affects that, would then in turn affect our recommendation to the board for the allocations for the next year.
Thanks, Corey. And I think I heard a comment that our recommendation will get filtered through Blaine Reilly to the board. Is that true? Did I hear that statement?
I wouldn't
Yeah.
call it filter. I kind of mentioned this earlier when I first came the first time. What we usually do is we look at whether it's from an agency, public comment, whatever it is, staff always does some sort of analysis on that information, right? Like, and then we will provide the information, the exact recommendation from the BMC along with the Director of Groundwater Sustainability together to the board for their consideration so that they can establish an allocation for the next year.
Okay. And then, this is a very important topic, I think, for our purview here, is to really understand what is going to be our role and how are we going to convey the message.
Mhm.
And especially if that message is hard for, the growth management objectives of the county. And so how is the county going to receive that? And I really want to make sure that we're able to provide that input. And so one of my questions maybe is that should, the director for the county maybe abstain from some of that input at a certain time or not, just because
Mhm.
there is that certain level of conflict there that may arise.
Yeah.
I've, maybe that's more for our board and our policy to kind of talk about a little bit, but really think that that is where that's our lane right there, is to really look at the basin, work with Blaine. I agree with that 100% in his role with the county, but then how do we come back and, what I would envision is that we would have a written response based on the best available data that goes to the county.
Mhm.
And we will need to formalize that and get a working format for that, I think, and likewise, if it's positive, I think we also want to record that too, and that's why that data is going to be critical. If we're not seeing the impact, and we want to document that part of it also, the success of it. So I think it works both ways, but really trying to figure out that the information and the data doesn't get distorted in some way, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
And I just want to add one quick thing to your point. That's a reason for a change for us to go from fiscal year to calendar year,
Right.
because we understand that the BMC in your current operation is that the annual report comes out. I think draft form comes out in late spring, and it gets approved by you all in early summer or around that time frame. So with a fiscal year look at, it doesn't allow us to fully consider your annual report and your recommendations. So we switched to calendar year so that if you approve the annual report, let's say early summer,
Mhm.
then we have months before we go back to the board in the end of the year, November, October timeframe. And there'll be multiple months where we can work with you, the BMC, and your staff to hear from you what your input is, so that we have the latest and greatest information before we bring it back to the board.
Yeah.
I'm not going to speak on how you operate in terms of who abstains, who doesn't. I'll let Supervisor Gibson, comment on that. But we have, in addition to that, we also have our monthly staff level meetings where we talk about, different ways we can better approach groundwater management. So the county is 100% trying to be, work with the BMC, be transparent, be forthcoming with how we do things. And that's the reason why we want to have these type of meetings, and we're happy to come back at any time it makes sense and have the town hall, for example, to talk more about that, be at LOCAC to speak to members that aren't able to attend this meeting, for example. So we're happy to collaborate moving forward.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Corey.
Yeah, this thought's been kind of running through my mind ever since this gentleman asked it. How are we going to respond to adverse data? And that'll be a discussion that we do need to have at some point. What causes us to pump the brakes? Is it 2 years of water levels that aren't increasing, maybe decreasing? I mean, we had that in our monitoring report this year. We didn't get a bump in water levels, even though we had a decent rain year. So we're going to have that discussion about what it will take. I think rather than wait until we see really negative trends, maybe we should have that in our mind now. Just will it take for us to say, oops, slow down?
Yeah, and that's a good point, because right now, to change the sustainable yield, it takes unanimous approval. And that was based, the reason for my comment is, yeah.
I'll speak, I don't want to step on Beth.
Yeah,
but
no,
I've
go
got
ahead,
some
Beth.
thoughts-
We're-
thoughts
that was a
before we
good-
wrap up.
No, this is a great
Good discussion,
conversation.
yeah.
I'm enjoying it. Yeah, and I think the bottom line for me is I know there's different data sources out there. I say we should operate under the umbrella of what DWR would put out. I mean, technically we do, but I also don't think that there are other consultants or agencies out there that should supersede the BMC at any point without the BMC encompassing that same information within our annual report, or having our own staff hydrogeologist somehow bring it in or endorse it. I just can't imagine what that situation might be. So that is kind of concerning, because I would hate for us to have conflicting data to make it a muddy process of, well, which one are we going to consult and which one are we going to take as the correct data? I think that's kind of a slippery slope for us to include that. So I want to just put that out there as a concern I have about data. So is there anything else, anyone?
Well, I want to make sure colleagues have a chance. I've got some thoughts on it.
I pretty much said what I think we're just gonna, at some point, that real discussion is gonna have to happen. Because we've been focused on getting it started, and we know that we haven't met all the criteria in the basin plan yet in terms of salt levels and water, freshwater levels. We're trending, but we need some serious thought about what happens if we're not trending.
Yeah.
So if I could, I think that's all baked into the process that we've spent now 10 years working on here. And I want to really emphasize the positive nature of the experience here at the BMC. I can't remember where it exactly came from, but about something about, the county's growth management objectives for Los Osos. It is sustainable growth consistent with available resources. And that has been absolutely explicit on every conversation we've had. That is the fundamental basis of the Coastal Commission's analysis of our plans going forward. It is a requirement. And that's why we have these numerous conservative approaches. The 1% growth rate in and of itself, the averaging over 5 years, the ramp in until we get to 2028. All of those things are extremely conservative approaches to just being extraordinarily careful about adding demand to the basin. I would submit, Blaine Reilly is our Director of Groundwater Sustainability. His job is to advise the Board of Supervisors. His job is also to represent the county to this body. And so while I am the voting member and we've decided that Blaine wouldn't be an alternate, and one of these days I've got to get an alternate because presumably there will be a day when I'm not sitting here. I don't know. I don't think, I don't see there's any reason to suspect that Blaine's interests are any different than what is represented here by the county at the BMC. And I would submit, in fact, I would commit to any information regarding the groundwater resource in the Los Osos groundwater basin, Blaine would bring to this body. This is the body by court order that is charged with doing this. And I would remind ourselves that the court oversees this. So there's again, another check and balance keeping us away from moving in a direction that's going to be damaging to the groundwater basin. So I don't see the matter of, I don't see distortion. I think the word distortion at some point was used. I don't see that. You know, part of that, and something I've been very committed to as we've evolved as the BMC, is the development of trust. I think we have a trusting relationship here. I would offer that our county staff understands the concerns of the purveyors. You know, we sit in a slightly different, significantly different position than you. With, you know, our land use authority is our interest. We want to exercise it responsibly. So it's been about developing trust. And then I guess the other thing I would say, going back to the idea that all of this is structured on a very conservative basis, the 5-year average looking back is a conservative approach in the sense that things are the plan, and in fact the action, the result of the action of this community working through the BMC has been for things to get better. So if we're taking a lagging average of things, what's happening in the current year, it should be better than what's happened in the years past. And yes, there's going to be natural variation in there, but that's all baked into how we approach this. You know, what reaction do we have over if we have 2 years of drought? That's a fair question. But I would counsel that we have to make sure, and we should mutually adopt the right time frame, because we're talking about a large natural system that's subject to natural variability. We have technical experts who've studied this. Most everything we're doing here is based on 20-year averages of things. And so I think we need to have confidence about that. But between the lagging aspects of this and the fact that we're smoothing out the natural variability, I'm very comfortable that we have a very conservative approach to utilizing the groundwater resources of this basin as we contemplate future growth. You know, that will be an ongoing conversation forever, right? That is what we have to do to take care of the community of Los Osos, is that this body, I don't see this body going away. You know, individually we will be replaced, but the effort here doesn't change. So all of that, I see all of this coming together in a really positive way. We are going to make progress here. We are going to see positive change because we're being careful about it. So I just want to give you hope here. I want to talk about optimism. It's all good.
I appreciate optimism.
Good.
I think that's good. You know, I can't help but think back to the critically overdrafted basin issue that we kind of went over. I think it was last year or the year before. It's kind of been hanging over us for some time, and it's come up multiple times. And I think that was a situation where I think even Toby Moore with Golden State may have felt that we were moving a little bit hastily to try to get DWR to, and they never ended up doing it. They never removed that designation. So they disagreed maybe with your opinion and also with Blaine in that instance. And so I'm just wondering if we could find ourselves in a situation like that again, where we see it one way, but the county sees it another way, and we get to this impasse. But at the end of the day, the county has the ultimate authority to issue whatever growth rate you see fit. And so can you give us any assurance whatsoever that we won't come to that moment again?
Well, the county is 5 members of the Board of Supervisors, over which I only have 1 vote. I've asked for more. I haven't been granted to this date yet. But I think the assurance comes in the oversight of the Coastal Commission, first and foremost. That we have to comply with the provisions of our local coastal program, and we've made commitments that we won't be damaging significant, coastal resources. And if we're doing that, I think the other absolute safeguard is the oversight of the court. And if any action by any member of this party is seen to be detrimental to the health of the groundwater basin, any other party has the right, and I can say this because there are no attorneys in the room, and so I won't be contradicted right now unless Erica Stuckey's on Zoom someplace. But I think any other party has the right to go to the court and say, hey, what's going on here? So I would feel confident in that. Let me speak specifically to this designation of critical overdraft. As I'm sure you know, that is a designation under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, that does not apply to the basin we are managing. It has been used as a signal, as a talking point by many. But to be honest, if we really look at our annual reports, I don't think that designation can be sustained with the evidence that we have on the record right now. It has not been removed because, to my knowledge, the county did not ask for it to be removed, nor would we, I think, until we could get consensus with the BMC. I think it's outdated. I think it simply doesn't apply to the situation. And likewise, there's a designation of a level of severity 3 within the county's resource management system that, again, is outdated. It does not comport with the findings that the Coastal Commission made, that there was a sustainable water supply available to advance growth within these very measured bounds that we have. And I think that at some point that needs to be corrected, just so that there's no confusion. Because we are moving forward with water purveyor support based on the idea that there is water available. That's not consistent with RMS level of severity 3. It's not consistent with critical overdraft. Those, though, are just labels that don't affect the actual administration of our land use ordinance and the growth. And so I think we can take that up when we feel comfortable doing it.
Yeah, I just, a couple of comments on that. I mean, you mentioned our course of action going to the courts and the Coastal Commission. Those, to me, that's extraordinary measures to some degree that I hope we don't get to, because that wouldn't be productive for anybody. So I think my comments were more in line of how do we continue this collaborative effort, and the fact that the county does have the land use authority and they have an interest for the rights of their constituents to develop their property. I mean, that is something that the purveyors don't have. So that is an unusual characteristic. And that was really the basis for my comment on that, and so I think, we got to recognize that that's there. And that is part of what we're dealing with as a group. And so we're going to have to cross that. We're going to have to cover that. And ensure, the fact that the basin where we started out in this journey, we still have work left to do,
Oh, yeah.
And so there is that level of uncomfort that, are we moving too fast? Are we moving at the right pace? Like Corey mentioned, is this a perfect plan no, there's going to have to be adaptability in it as we move along. And we're doing the best we can with the information. You know, this has been a 30-year journey to get here. I think we do have a good plan that, you know, I support and want to help move along.
Correct.
But at the same token, I do want to make sure that we're protecting the interest of the community. And I mean, ultimately, one of the reasons why the basin is doing as well as it is because of the community and their conservation and
Exception.
reduction in water. So
Exception.
to me, that is, you know, significant, and we need to respect that
Yep.
level of interest from the community. And so, you know, yeah, we definitely have some work ahead of us. I mean, I absolutely, you know, recognize all these concerns that we're hearing and about the impact and this growth may have, and share some of those same concerns. And in addition, you know, I commend the county for listening to us. They've put in an enormous, you know, Claire and Corey,
Yep.
you know, in my opinion, you two are the right people for this journey. You've done a great job and appreciate working with you guys. There's, you know, this plan, you know, the basin metrics, I think just jumping back to that is another significant part of this that we have to deal with. It when we developed the basin metric, it wasn't intended for this purpose. We've adopted it and we've embraced it, but we got to understand that may not be the best metrics to look at. So Corey, I appreciate your comment about that I don't want to go down that path and have such a narrow pinpoint on the basin metrics. Let's leave it out there that if we see these other adverse effects out there that we may not be aware of now, that we can utilize that too as part of, I think, relying on this data and the input. I'd like to see staff, you know, have come back with in our meeting on a, you know, monthly basis when we have our meeting, and we look at that and see what have we done and what have we improved and where is this development as we monitor our basin throughout the year. And then we come to that final conclusion at the end of the year. At the end of the day, our work is definitely not done. This is something we should probably put a lot of priority on. As Corey mentioned again, they had a 6-month window to do this. They came at it hard and fast. We should do the same thing on the BMC and really understand, you know, what is our lane and how are we gonna respond to adverse impacts. Yeah, and you know, your overarching comment, I've said this before, you know, I celebrate a lot of what we've done as the basin management and where we were before the BMC and years even before that. You know, there was times when this collaboration wasn't here in Los Osos and we had purveyors doing their own things, and it was a little bit chaotic. It was chaotic.
Yep.
And now we have that plan. Is the basin plan perfect? It's not perfect either, you know, but we do have a plan and we're marching down and we are seeing positive impacts. You know, we've implemented projects, we've taken measures, and we've I would consider it successful to this point. So I'd like to make sure that we stay on that course.
Sure.
That's our job and our duty.
Absolutely. If I could just comment quickly
Sure.
on your point about metrics, absolutely. You know, trying to reduce the state of this basin to four numbers is, you know, that's it's got its. I know why we do it, because it's simpler to deal with 4 numbers than it is other things.
Yeah.
But let's remember that we have a project to update, review, and decide whether there are better ways of calculating these metrics, as well as looking at the bigger picture. And we're also on the threshold of a major increase in our ability to understand the basin through the transient model that's about to come online. So we'll be able, you know, and that's the kind of, and I would point out the county was instrumental in bringing that forward. That's the kind of contribution I want us to make, and with that develop the trust that we're moving together in coordination here.
Yeah, I agree. And do look forward to that model. I think that's going to be a better tool than we've had in the past to work with. So do look forward to that.
Yeah, I agree. I think the transient model is going to be pivotal in a lot of what we do at BMC. And in respect to that, I think that, you know, I mean, we're making these decisions right now. We're setting these growth rates. We're trying to open it up slowly. We don't have that yet. It could give us information going back to what Mark was saying, we're going to have to take that and evaluate it. What if we get the transient model and it indicates to our hydrogeologists that we may need to reduce the basin yield metric? I agree with Mark that your role at the county may lend itself to a little bit of bias, on leaning toward development when the rest of us here are, not necessarily thinking in that vein. So I would encourage you to consider maybe given a vote of that nature, it may be appropriate to recuse yourself to prevent, because it does have to be a unanimous vote. I think that in a situation like that, it could get very problematic.
I understand where you're coming from, Beth. Let's cross that bridge when we come to. Again, this is the matter of building trust that we've worked hard on, and I think we do it. Again, I don't see I don't see a conflict of interest here, because again, the county's interest is to administer our land use authority consistent with available resources on a sustainable basis. And so that there's not, I mean, I don't see an interest in the county to overbuild Los Osos. Rampant, quick growth in Los Osos is not in the county's interest in any way, shape, or form. So this idea that we're doing this consistent with available sustainable resources is fundamental to our approach. I don't see that we're sideways with that at all.
Okay, and I completely respect that. I think that we will probably cross that bridge when we come to it, if it even comes up. We don't know that we'll even get there. So totally, I agree with you on that point. The one thing I do want to mention, I mean, we are talking about being conservative. We are talking about opening this up slowly, because we don't know. There's a lot of unknowns. We don't know what after a year of building, what our water supply is actually going to do, even with Title 19 offsets. We may have the rubber band effect of we're issuing permits and they all get built in the second year, not in the first year. And then wham, we see a whole change in water use. So we don't know right now. And I'm just wondering if there's any chance that we could just stick with the waiting list in the first 3 batches, rather than opening it up to the potential for people from out of town, for developers who have been sitting and waiting for this for a long time, who may have been already collecting their Title 19 credits for a long time, who are going to have a significant advantage over people who may have been waiting to build and may be completely unaware of the process. Is there any reason why we can't open it up slowly, rather than making sure that they get the spots and the allocations get taken no matter what by whoever is available to take them? Can we just stick with the wait list at first to be sure that we have that amount of equity? I mean, I'm just concerned that there's not going to be a whole bunch of people that are ready right away, because they just got notified, I mean, maybe in August, and there's 200 that are already interested. So let's give them a fair chance. I think that's just my opinion.
Understood. I guess my guess is that 25 homes won't get us very far down the wait list before they're going to be absorbed. So again, open to crossing that bridge when we come to it. But there have been folks certainly expressing interest. We get a regular stream of interest asking our office what the situation is and when can I build. So I don't know. I think in the first couple years that those caps of 0.4, 0.6, 0.8, before we even consider getting to 1%, I think there is the concern. I guess there comes a point, and I won't weigh in on it, but just to identify the issue is a property owner is a property owner. and being on the wait list is one thing, but having property that's zoned for particular use. And if there's an opportunity within the constraints imposed, how do I weigh a wait list property owner versus a non-wait list property owner if there's an allocation available? I don't know. I don't know where to land on that right now.
Okay, yeah, I don't know either what the right answer is. I just wonder if
Sure.
it
It's a
could,
question. That's a fair question.
yeah, okay. And I think it looks like Corey has something. I'll let
Yeah.
him go.
If I may add to the conversation, one thing to consider is the wait lists, as you said, they may or may not be ready, right? So we can't, the county in our land use authority can't create a de facto prohibition for everyone else. So what I mean by that is if the wait list is, we have to give them priority, right? Because that's the system was created where you at some point as a property owner added yourself to this name by putting down deposit or whatever. We give you priority. That is, we have to honor that, yes. But if we were to say we have to build a wait list first, and there's over 200 single family properties. I forget how many in the multifamily, but there's this whole list. We can't stop development or stop other property owners from enjoying their properties just because we have this wait list. And that essentially, if we have to wait for the whole wait list to be built out, creates this kind of de facto prohibition outside of the wait list. So the reason why we brought our approach is that our approach brings this kind of walk that fine line between honoring the wait list, but also when the wait list is not ready, and that's why we have that kind of phase one, that of the year, which is the January 1st through end of June, and then we open up to the wait list in that second phase. That last tranche or the last phase is, hey, we gave everyone the wait list a chance already this year. If they're not ready, then we open it up to everyone else. And that gives, that prevents us from essentially creating this de facto prohibition outside the wait list. And so that's something that we considered. And, it's hard because the wait list definitely, there's a lot of people that have been waiting, and there's also people that may not be ready. And so we wanted to walk that fine line. And as I mentioned before, it's not perfect. If it doesn't work out, we'll have a chance to bring it back to the BMC, bring it back to the board to reconsider, hey, do we amend this process so that it can work out better, one way or another. But we think that this is the fairest shot at it based on what we know today, and we're open to suggestions in the future.
Thank you for that, Corey. I guess part of my concern is the limited availability of the Title 19 offset credits. It's, I think that they're hard to find for average people. And so I just worry that, they're not going to be as easy to get once the rest of the people that are notified finally get their plans together and everything. So all of that being said, I think it sounds like this is a well thought out approach on the county's part to allow people outside. I understand that. I guess it's just, are we being as conservative if we are insisting that we build, at this level each year, if we're bringing in, people from outside the wait list? That's my only question there.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Corey and Claire. Appreciate it. Okay, so we have the dates. Everybody's gone over those dates that the next
You want to put those dates back up again,
Yeah,
just
I think
so
that's-
everybody can see them for the future opportunities?
yeah, I think that's a good way to leave off, just so everybody knows what the next step is. Yep, there we go.
And yeah, that first opportunity is tomorrow.
Right.
Okay.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. Okay, we'll move to item 6, our consent agenda. We have two items on consent. We
Yeah,
have-
thank you,
Yeah, go ahead.
Chair
Yeah.
Zimmer. Yeah, pretty normal consent agenda, though I did want to flag the expenditures report. If you'll see in the first couple of pages, it's probably on the third page. There is an invoice for Cleith Harris Geologist that's flagged in yellow. That is an invoice that's being proposed to be funded under our technical support line item. The reason that I flagged it, the BMC rules and regulations that we established in December of 2023 authorized the executive director to direct both BMC legal counsel and BMC hydrogeologists to perform work up to a limit of $5,000 before requesting additional approval to authorize contingency funding for those tasks. And so this last invoice put us over that threshold. And so I flagged it for the BMC's consideration and would request that that invoice be approved and then authorize the executive director to be able to access an additional $5,000 as needed to allow the BMC hydrogeologists to provide technical support for the BMC. And for an example of why that's needed, at our last BMC meeting, there was strong interest in reinitiating the evaluation of the basin metrics. And so that is work that we have requested that Cleith Harris perform in the next month or two and bring back the recommendations for updated metrics that account for our improved groundwater monitoring program and other considerations. And to be able to fund that work, we need access to that additional technical support contingency funding.
Just to be clear, it's the $780.
Correct. That is the invoice, and then the authorization to spend an additional,
Okay.
let's just say up to $10,000. So it's, another 5,000 minus the 780 or something in that range.
Okay. Go ahead and open it up. Public comment? Seeing none?
I'll move approval of consent with the recommendation request made by our executive director.
Provided we have no online comment, I'll second that.
There's no public comment online or in the boardroom.
Sorry,
Yeah, I'll
I
second
got
that.
distracted. Did we get a
Yeah,
second?
yes.
Okay, great. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion passes 4-0.
Okay. We'll move to item 7, public comments on items not appearing on the agenda.
If you're in the boardroom and you would like to make a public comment, please come up to the podium. And if you're online, please raise your hand. We will take public comment in the boardroom first.
Becky McFarland. I appreciate this conversation. What's frustrating for us is that questions were being answered, but we still have questions. And I know it has to run under the Brown Act and things like that. I'm hoping that at the town hall or somewhere, I know at LOCAC, there can be some back and forth, but we still have things that, a discussion. It's not like there's ever a place where there's a discussion back and forth. So I'm hoping, and I wish Claire was still here. I don't know who's setting up that whole town hall, is to really let people, this was good discussion. We have 10 citizens that are attending either online or here. And we have out of 15,000 people, 10,000 voting adults, people that this could affect. And so I know I bring that up all at the time, the guest houses, and how do we get the message out to people in this town? This is important. This is as big as the sewer going in. Things are going to be changing. What I didn't hear was things about hotels and things that are going in and how that works. They use a lot of water. I know Van Bearden's putting in like 5 long-term stay units behind his big building. And then that 16 hotel rooms went in down in Baywood because they got permits before. How is that all? I haven't heard anything. Maybe I missed it, but how is that? And then how is, if there's low income housing and it's, apartments, like over here are some great little apartments. My son's friends live in some. Are those going in? Is that 1% growth? There's a lot. Also, it was brought up about how the court oversees this board, and it's good, but the judge is not a scientist. A judge is not a hydrologist or a hydrogeologist. The DWR does not look at your stuff. I've called them. They don't look at your reports. They're not required to. So, Beth brought up some good questions. And really, should the county be making a decision? You guys are overseeing this basin and you should be making the decisions. Blaine really is a nice man. I've met with him for like an hour before. But his business is drilling wells and putting in vineyard, all of that sort of thing. I didn't see any sustainability in his background. He's very knowledgeable and has done stuff all over the world. But I just want to bring those things up, and back to the judge. We can't talk to the judge. We can't write to the judge. The judge gets your report and signs off. DWR does not. Anyway, and the person I talked to is the person that oversees all of the Sigma basins in the state. So there's some important things that people need to know. And I hope people are open to hearing that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Patrick McGibney. I'd like to comment on several things. One thing Mr. Gibson said about the county wanting to manage, they have the land use authority and they want to manage our resources in a sustainable way. That's their goal, but they haven't done that. I mean, back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, they had a huge building boom knowing that our water basin was in overdraft at that time. So right now we are still in overdraft. That's not my opinion. That is actually DWR's opinion. And if you look in the basin management plan or in Dan's report today on page 7, it'll say that we are still in critical overdraft. That is what DWR says. Beth has said we go by the standards of DWR. That is what they are saying. They also say that you do not use a basin yield metric for sustainability. It does not show or indicate sustainability. You never use that. But yet that is exactly what this is all based on, is what our sustainable yield, which is just an arbitrary amount that you decide using certain criteria, that is what the water basin can manage. But yet you had a sustainable yield that you changed back in 2016, and you changed it from the court order 2,400 acre feet a year to the 2,760. That went on for 5 years, and it was based on programs that were supposedly going to be in effect that never were. So we were in critical overdraft. You just increased it then. So the sustainable yield isn't something that you just go back and forth with. In the basin plan, talking about the basin yield metric, which is what you're trying to use to decide whether we can have more growth or not. The basin yield metric is basically theoretically a balance between the production rate and the extraction rate and the use rate, how much is being used. That gives you the basin yield metric, but that is an arbitrary situation because in the basin plan, it says, and I think it's on page 137, that you can balance the basin yield metric in 2 ways: increase the sustainable yield or decrease production. That's what the basin plan says. That's what you did. You increased the sustainable yield just to 2,760, and it was never there. I mean, we didn't have that in our basin. So we need to start thinking about the basin plan, or what you guys are supposed to be doing, protecting our basin and making sure it's sustainable for the current population. Mr. Gibson says that if you don't like something, you can go to the court. You can't. The stipulated judgment's very clear that it takes a unanimous vote to be able to make any decision like that. That means Mr. Gibson has to approve. He won't.
Thank you, Patrick.
Richard Margetson. I'm going to go to Title 19. The private property owner who has been sitting on a lot forever and wants to build and has to collect these credits. How is that process going to unfold? Are they going to be allowed to hire a plumber to pursue those credits? Is it going to have to be the contractor who's building the home for them? And big development. My concern is that we don't get into the situation that happened with the wastewater project where there was fraud. I'm sure Mr. Gibson remembers. I know Chuck Cecina remembers. You remember too, Mark, Water Boys. I mean, when I took that to the Board of Supervisors, Rita Neal, County Council, and the Auditor's Office, and it came back to the Board of Supervisors. Mr. Meacham wanted he didn't get approval by the board, but he wanted them to contact the state and have their license pulled. I'm concerned that we already know there's not enough credits. we to do all of the vacant lots. We also know that some people are going to be reluctant to change out their 1.6 to a 1 when it was just done a few years ago, the inconvenience and that whole process. So I wonder how that's going to be addressed in the future, because I don't want people making up, filling the forms. Let me put it this way. I don't want them filling out the forms fraudulently. And what's the checks and balances going to be? What plumbers, if plumbers are going to be allowed to do it, what plumbers are going to be allowed to do it? We haven't really had that discussion, because there are going to be some people that, yeah, they'd love to build, but they have no idea what the next step is in the process of doing the things they need to do to actually start pouring footings and getting their contractor building the home.
Thank you, Richard.
We have one public comment online. Emily Miggins, all you have to do is unmute yourself.
Hello, this is Emily. Just making a quick comment on the back and forth on judges and separately DWR. Another thing that we heard from DWR, and I brought it up at one of these basin management committees maybe last year, was that because I had asked the manager we were speaking to of the Sigma basins, what are the best practices by, water masters, which are equivalent to, our BMC. And she really very adamantly said one of the best examples of a adjudicated basin like ours was Monterey County. I believe that was what she said. And having a public member on the BMC, not someone who's elected, not someone who, necessarily, I guess you could have, a business or someone who understands a lot of the different political processes. So I don't know how you would agendize that, but I think, part of that discussion was about building the trust with the public, like actually having a public member, and maybe a public member who is very well qualified, who might be a hydrologist or a hydrogeologist. I know that my husband, in watching the Coastal Commission meeting, he was really disappointed by the civil engineer, PhD, county sustainability manager, and how director, how he was explaining pushing back seawater intrusion. He's like, clearly, and I mean, my husband works with engineers every day. He really felt like he wasn't really being transparent in his statements about that. It's an unknown right now. And perhaps having someone with technical skills that lives in our community. I don't know who'd want to step up for the job, but really understands the data that you're dealing with. That would help grow confidence. The other thing I was going to say is by that same DWR representative that some of us met with, she stated that educating a judge on an adjudicated basin is mission impossible. You know, at the last minute, there's a lot of questions before, you know, hearings are up and decisions are made on how we're doing, et cetera. She said they're not scientists. You know, it's very rare that she's met on any of these Sigma basins a judge that actually understands groundwater and how basins work, basins like ours. So I just wanted to make those public comments. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, there's no further public comment in the boardroom or online.
Okay. We'll bring it back to the board. I don't know if there's any discussion or answered any questions that we have. Dan, is there anything you want to respond to?
No direct questions that I feel I'm qualified to
Okay.
respond to.
Okay, thank you for your comments. We'll move to item 9A, action items. There are none. I'm sorry, missed our executive director's report, item 8. So I'll turn it over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Chair Zimmer. Yeah, just a brief executive director's report and some good news to share with the Basin Management Committee today. I might as well start with that. We recently received notification from the Rose Foundation that the Basin Management Committee was selected for a grant under the Central Coast Community-Based Water Quality Grants Program. So if you recall, back in June, we presented information on this program to the BMC and received authorization to submit an application. That application was to obtain $150,000 in grant funding to support the construction of a new lower aquifer monitoring well. And so we recently learned last week and then formally learned this week that that application was successful and that the BMC will be eligible for receiving that funding to support what looks to be a new monitoring well in likely targeting, well, I think it needs to target during calendar year 2025. So happy to share that. I also wanted to acknowledge Jamie Gerard and all her efforts in taking lead in preparing that application. She really did all the heavy lifting, and so I very much appreciate her role in that. And that we need to figure out some of the mechanisms. How does the money specifically get made available to the BMC, or is it transferred to the CSD as we have done for other monitoring well programs? So we got to work out the details, but in general and so we'll bring more information on this back to the BMC at a future meeting. Just a couple other quick updates. As I mentioned, we're talking with Cleeth Harris geologists about providing the updated metric recommendations for the water level, chloride, and nitrate and metrics. And so we'll bring that back to you. It may take a little bit longer than it would normally just to do the work because Cleeth Harris is really focused on the transient model currently and wanting to get that updated, calibrated, and ready for use for the BMC as part of the water recycling funding study and also in time to meet the schedule requirements for the grant that's paying for a significant portion of that project. And then in terms of the other update here is just on the calendar year 2024 basin monitoring improvement projects. At our last meeting, the BMC selected Cleeth Harris geologists to provide design and construction oversight services for the LA 14 and 16 well modification projects. They've been working with the CSD to prepare a bid package to obtain a contractor to do that work. That bid package is scheduled to go to the Los Osos CSD's board of directors on October 3rd. And from there can be released. And then once bids are received, that'll come back. We can bring that back to the BMC for their consideration for authorizing the construction of the LA 14s and the LA 16 well modifications. And that concludes the executive director's report.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Any questions for Dan before we go to public comment?
That aerial survey, have you heard anything about that at all? I mean, I know it was, I think, fourth quarter or maybe third, but.
Yeah, no, sorry. I haven't heard anything. I did look on the website in anticipation of getting that question for this meeting. There is no update, unfortunately, but any day now, yeah.
I'll take that.
All right. Thank you. We'll go to public comment.
If you are online and you have a public comment, please raise your hand. And if you're in the boardroom, please come up to the podium. We will take public comment in the boardroom first.
Thank you, Dan, for your report. Becky McFarland. I wasn't quite sure what you meant about Cleith Harris looking at, was it the water level and the chloride or nitrate level? I wasn't sure if that meant you're looking at adjusting them, like a different criteria to show that they're met. So that's my only question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Patrick McGibney again, always. Speaking about Cleith Harris, might be a good question to just ask Spencer, is our basin currently sustainable or not? I mean, his opinion might say something. There's nothing in the Dan's report that has ever said that our basin is sustainable at this time. So I'm not sure how we're going on that premise. It talked in Dan's report under the sustainable yield. It talks about that it was approved to 2380, and it gives the reasons. This was done just in 2023. It gives the reasons why it was approved that way, but then it didn't give a reason why originally it was approved that way. Why did you ever change it to 2380 from the 2760? What brought it down from that? That was never a discussion. It was never a vote on you guys. I mean, that's the way the stipulated judgment says that you're supposed to do these things. To change the sustainable yield, you discuss everything that's involved and you take a vote on it. The public never knew how that really happened. Transient models anticipated to be available fall 24. That's where we are now. So when will the transient model be available? And I know there's an application, it says for a WRFP grant to develop transient model and to analyze recycled water and supplemental water projects to improve the sustainability of the Los Osos Basin. We have neither a transient model at this time nor a supplemental water source. And in the basin plan, it says that that will be required for build out. So shouldn't we wait till we have the transient model and especially a supplemental water source before we start building out? Wouldn't that be the responsible way to manage the basin for sustainability? Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
There's no further public comment in the boardroom, but we do have one online. Jeff Edwards, all you have to do is unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good afternoon again, committee. My name is Jeff Edwards. And as you know, at the end of the ED report is a status of basin plan infrastructure projects. And I would recommend that you schedule an agenda item to update that list of basin plan infrastructure projects. There are some that need to be deleted, modified, or added. And without taking the time right now to go into the details, I think clearly there are some that should be removed And then there are the ones that I mentioned that might likely be added. For example, a supplemental water project. That is the intertie for the state water project. And we know there's an environmental document that's been approved for that intertie, but we don't have any wet water to put in that pipe yet. And so I think that would be worthy of an agenda item, as well as being put on the infrastructure project list. Your executive director, Mr. Heimel, participates in a working group at the State Water Subcontractors Advisory Committee, and I think he could be very helpful in securing the water we need to put in that pipeline. Likewise, and another item you might consider adding to your list and bringing to your board as an agenda item for discussion is under Basin Management U, and that is the use of the creek discharge, specifically the inflatable dam that I've suggested that would allow during seasonal high flows, allow some additional lower basin recharge. And I think, again, that would be a good project to put on the list. And then lastly, we know that we have a GIS database now of all the wells. And so I think to consider a retirement program, which I think would fit under Basin Program M, and establish a well abandonment program, which would help overall basin management. And then lastly, on another topic by way of update, this morning, the county's debt advisory committee did approve a loan for Los Osos, just about $6.5 million in connection with the Los Osos Habitat Conservation Plan. So now that item will be going to the board, and hopefully the HCP will be jump-started, which ties into all the other things we've been talking about recently. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
All right, there's no further public comment online or in the boardroom.
Okay, we'll bring it back to the board. Further discussion. Any additional discussion on the executive director's report?
I'd be happy to address a couple of questions that came through.
Sure.
There was a question about the water level and the metric update. Just to clarify, based on input that we got at the last BMC meeting where we presented the fall 2024 water level and chloride metric results, and the challenges of using the Rosina well, we got direction to work at a staff level to bring back recommendations for how the BMC could consider modifying those metrics to better represent health and conditions within the basin. And, as we've talked about, we've made a number of improvements to our groundwater monitoring program that are currently not included or reflected in those metrics, because the frameworks for those metrics were established before these, basin monitoring projects were completed. So I think we have a number of opportunities both to incorporate new, better monitoring points, locations, data into the metrics. And so that's what we're working on at a staff level. And so those recommendations we will bring back to the BMC for consideration. The other one was, there was a question about the sustainable yield change from 2760 to 2380. And I just want to point everybody to the October 27th, 2021 BMC agenda packet. I mean, that outlines the process that the BMC went through, the data analysis, the criteria that was utilized to justify, and the vote that was taken. And I think it's important to highlight, because I think it's relevant to the discussion earlier about the growth management ordinance and tying it to the basin yield metric. one of the drivers for updating the sustainable yield estimate in 2021 was the fact that we were seeing a disconnect in what our sustainable yield estimate and our basin yield metric was telling us relative to what our water level and our chloride metrics were telling us. And because of that disconnect, we felt that it warranted investigating the sustainable yield estimate. And through that investigation, we identified that, yeah, we actually thought it should be lower than it was because of what we were seeing in the basin and the modeling and the analysis that was done in support of that. And so that's just an example of sort of that adaptive management process and tool set that we have available to us. We have a sustainable yield estimate, but we're constantly comparing that to what we're seeing in the physical measurements and the data that we get from the basin monitoring program and adjusting as needed. And so it's just one of the mechanisms we have available to us for basin management.
Good.
That was it.
Okay. So regarding the updates and that Cleith is working on and our transient model, do you think we're going to have the transient model before the updates? Because I would think the transient model would have an influence on the updates, right? So
yeah,
chicken,
it's a
egg.
good question. I mean, I think we could have the updates before the transient model because a lot of the work for the updates was already done. And just a reminder, everybody, we asked Cleith Terrace to do an evaluation of the metrics. They did it. They presented recommendations for how to modify it. And then we put it on hold because we started receiving outside funding from the National Estuary Program and other contributions that allowed us to put in these new wells and modify these other wells to become really a much better monitoring tool. And so, in talking with Cleith Terrace, he's like, well, it's actually not that much work to just bring those recommendations back with some slight modifications to include the new wells. That being said, I mean, the transient model is going to be our most sort of comprehensive, sophisticated, capable tool that we have for at least looking at potential future conditions within the basin. And understanding, maybe why historical conditions occurred as they did. So we'll have to take that into account.
So the transient model is close though, right?
It
I
is,
mean,
it is close. And so maybe that's something, I don't think it'll be available before the end of the year. Not that the end of the year is any sort of significant milestone for us, but maybe that's something that we could take both of those items in conjunction in 2025, early 2025. And, yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Leverage the value of the model in potentially influencing the metric.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, I see this as an iterative process, right? So we're proposing new ways of calculating the metrics. We can test those with the transient model. We can see, with a transient model can be run, I assume I'm correct, and the resulting basin metrics can be calculated. And we can see whether they meet up with an appropriate level of describing the state of the basin. And if we change those, then we can run the transient model again, or simply recalculate the metric to try to get a simple set of numbers that it represents this very complex physical system. So I think we're going to continue to do that as more information gets added to our mix. So I think that's just going to be part of our work going forward.
So will the runs of the model include these metrics, I guess, would really clarify that.
That's a good question. I mean, based on my understanding of models, I mean, yes, I mean, they're going to be modeling water levels, in all portions of the basin, and including where the locations where the existing wells or future wells that make up the metric are located. So yeah, I mean, I think we should be able to have model predictions of the metrics to compare to physically observed, conditions of the metric.
Then I wouldn't wait to release Harris's work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Let's just get it out there now. If he's already got it done, why are we holding on to it? Let's
Yeah, agreed. And And also, we put it on hold. It seemed like a good idea at the time. And then we're continuing with the Rose Foundation Community Water Quality Grant. We're going to add a new well we're going to want to include in the model. And we're also going to talk about Rosina and borehole leakage. And so I think it does make sense to bring it forth. If we have to modify it again, great. It means we get a chance to make it even better. So,
Okay,
yeah.
sounds
I think it's
good.
good input.
On the transient model, do we think that might be available next month for the meeting, or will it be longer than that?
It's going to be longer than that.
Right.
I don't think even at a staff level, we haven't been able to see calibration results or other things. So it's going to take some time. I wouldn't anticipate sort of publicly available model results or things until 2025.
Oh, okay. And then in that case, yeah, I agree. I think that if we could see that sooner, that would be better. My other question related to that is it possible that Cleve, or I guess Spencer Harris probably, be here for us to ask questions to kind of get more clarification instead of us trying to guess at some of the questions, I guess the mechanics of the change in the metrics?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for really specific technical components, I would defer to Spencer and his extensive knowledge and experience in the Los Osos Basin. So, yeah, and I think similarly for the transient model, that we're going to want to have direct access to him to be able to answer those questions in a timely and effective manner.
That's good. All right. Thank you. Okay, we're going to item 9, our action items. There are none. We'll move to item 10.
Yeah, no action items. Sorry, didn't mean to cut out. But just to preview, there are a couple action items that we're going to need to bring forth here soon. One is the budget for calendar year 2025, and the other is adopting a sustainable yield estimate for 2025. So I anticipate those two items coming at a future meeting.
All right, thank you.
Before we adjourn, I have one quick public service announcement. We have 2 openings on the CSD Board of Directors. We now have less than 1 hour to get an application in here at the district office. You can do it online as well. I think we're looking for people neighborhoods north of El Moro, and then the middle of town, Bush Farrell neighborhood, right on through across South Bay Boulevard. Less than an hour left. I know you're interested.
Yeah. All right.
Great satisfaction. That's the pay.
Satisfaction of public service.
Okay, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Gotta be in.
All right, yeah.